gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to talk about something that is a little bit different. I feel like I say that a lot, but this time it's actually different. We're going to be talking about how to defend yourself as a holy/disciplined priest in the open world. Now, this is probably a little bit outdated. First of all, it's a classic era video, and a lot of people have moved on to TBC. But also the fact that now that we have dual spec in classic era, most people are probably just going to play Shadow. Right, and I think dual spec is only like 50 gold or something, so, it's going to be most people are going to be able to obtain it pretty easily. But I figured I'd, put this out there anyways, because, some people like to run different versions of kind of raid specs, right? Maybe some with power infusion, some without. So if you have both of those taken up, right, then you're going to, not have a Shadow spec, unless you obviously respec one to Shadow that. And I got a comment from somebody that is really interesting because it was on an old video, so it kind of caught me off guard because usually I get comments on the newer videos, but it was a really nice, polite comment, and I try and give you guys feedback and answer you guys and stuff like that. So I didn't really have a video planned for today because we're about to get like a crazy blizzard around where I live, maybe. So, I was kind of like doing things to prepare for that. Not really too worried about it personally, but we have some like vulnerable people in the household and around us. So just want to make sure that we've got everything all set for that. Hopefully, shouldn't be that big of a deal. Just a mess to clean up tomorrow. But I think this is a really easy topic to talk about because like I've kind of like lived it, for a long time you didn't have dual spec in this game. So I was the guy constantly roaming around the open world as basically Shadow Disc. And, I've always played a PvP server, so you do have to be able to defend yourself a little bit. Now let's kind of read out the comment here, and we'll get into it. So, I would love for you to cover strategies for surviving in open world PvP, settings as a Holy Priest, and just all-around solo existing outside of town as a Holy Priest. What are your methods of surviving? What do you recommend as a Holy main spec? I want to main Holy once I hit 60, and I am not interested in respecting just to play without a group. Please help. Thank you. So, thank you for the comment, and it was pretty specific, like I said, so we'll kind of get right into it. I have the tree up here. We don't have a League video in the background because, like I said, it's not like I'm fully transitioning over to just, like, having League background content. I don't want people to think it's kind of like a lazy thing. It's just when I don't need to have something in the background for reference, I'll just use, footage like that. But in this particular case, I think it's helpful to have the talent trees. So, first, I'll kind of like preface this by saying that I think that for the most part, you are at a disadvantage in the open world as Holy Disc, especially compared to Shadow. Now, there's going to be certain scenarios and certain matchups where that's not the case. And what I'm talking about here is not necessarily group PvP, right? So I'm talking about if you are the solo player and you are either 1v1ing or you are trying to like 1v2, 1v3 other people. I think that generally speaking, Shadow is kind of better at that. Holy can be good at like taking out really new or bad inexperienced players. For example, let's say you had some people, like 3 people attacking you, right? And you had some people that are like sub 60, right? So they maybe don't hit that hard and they can't really do a ton of damage to you. And let's say you're fairly geared. In situations like that, the disc spec can actually be a little bit more obnoxious, especially if they're caster DPS, right? Because I feel like one of the big advantages of Shadow tends to be how well it counters melee due to the physical damage reduction and a bunch of other things about the spec, like the leech and stuff like that. These things aren't as critical, they don't make as big of an impact on spellcasters, right? So if you're facing like, multiple mages or multiple warlocks, I mean, first of all, you should just lose. But let's say they're like really bad, they don't know what they're doing. You might actually have an easier time fighting that as a Holy Priest, potentially. Okay? But yeah, for the most part, you should be losing, I want to say, against like every class. I mean, that sounds really doomer, but I think that's like the technical reality. Now, will you lose against every class? No, right? Because a lot of players are bad or they're not expecting PvP, right? So, you can definitely survive and make yourself either too annoying for these people to want to go after in a lot of cases that don't really know what they're doing, or you can take them out yourself in most cases. But we'll kind of go through the matchups, and I'll just give you what I think should happen in the matchup, and then we'll talk about specifics and build and stuff like that. So Hunter, I feel like should just be able to permakite you to death. Like, there's really nothing you should be able to do as a Holy Disc Priest. They're just going to put Viper Sting on you. You're going to be able to Shadow Word Pain, but I'm 99% sure even the Shadow Word Pain tick doesn't disrupt their cheetah. So, you have to be able to hard cast to hit them to get them out of their, or I guess you could wand cast. But again, like, they can toggle their aspect. So if they're actually like playing reasonably well, shouldn't really be an issue, right? And they're just gonna like permakite you with Viper, and it's hard to get like big chunk damage on them is the big problem, right? Against super undergeared hunters, you stand a better chance because like the strategy here is like you're basically whittling them down with your dot. And if you happen to be an undead, you basically get 2 dots. I feel like this increases your chances of surviving the encounter a lot, right? Because you get Devouring Plague, and we'll talk about Devouring Plague specifically and why specifically I'm actually Undead Priest whenever I play WoW Classic Era. But yeah, for the most part, Hunters are just a particularly bad matchup for you if they actually understand what's going on with their class. Right, the pet is also very annoying because the pet, you can't really focus resources on taking out the pet, and the pet is just doing a ton of damage to you. And the hunter, even a hunter that's not super geared, does great damage to you as well. The pet also eats through your, your improved inner fire, so it's really just not great all around. Unless you basically start inside melee range of the hunter, like in the dead zone for some reason. I guess if you're like a Night Elf Priest and you melded somewhere and you kind of really got the jump on a hunter, you could maybe take them out pretty easily in some cases. But for the most part, that's not really going to be the case. So Hunter's just a really hard matchup. Warrior, it kind of depends on how geared they are. So this type of spec actually, I've killed tons of Warriors as this spec, but they tend to not be super great, right? Or they're not super geared. Like if you have, a High Warlord geared warrior, and he's got the weapon, and he's got the armor, he's got a sizable amount of HP, it's going to be a problem for you, right? Because, and especially if they decide to pop wreck or something like that, it's mostly over, unless you get like insane separation somehow, which shouldn't really be possible. And what we're talking about here too, guys, is we're talking about like not with all the gadgets, right? So we're talking about strictly basically like your class's tools. Now, a great way to turn any fight in your favor in WoW Classic is to just use more engineering or use more consumes in the opponent. So if you really want to be a problem in the open world and kind of not be fodder to anybody that's just running around, you want to carry things like speed potions, you want to carry things like lips, you want to carry mana potions, health potions even. A lot of people think that health potions on priests, it's kind of like dumb because like why would you use a health potion when you can use a mana potion and you get way more value from the mana potion? But the problem is that sometimes you actually need the health right in that moment and you don't have another source. Like let's say you get kicked and you're really low or something like that. So there's going to be some periods of time where a health potion is actually the superior choice if you just need to like live like literally through the next moment, right? And even, it could be something where, like, you're fighting a warrior and a warlock, and like, maybe you'd normally lip, but you can't really lip because there's dots on you, and you need a little bit extra health. So you want to carry basically everything. Grenades. Grenades are particularly good on priests because you don't have anything that really DRs them, right? So on a rogue, it's not that grenades are bad. In fact, like, in specific matchups like mage, grenades they're almost part of the play-by-play in terms of like the optimal way the matchup is played, in my opinion. You could basically try and stack your 5 combo points. You ambush, eviscerate, the mage blinks. You immediately toss a grenade for the poly. So there's like a script almost, right, in some of these fights with how you use grenades. But on rogue, you don't get to use them as much because the DR factor, right? You have to be careful where you use them. On priest, you can use them a lot more dynamically. because again, like you're not DRing them with anything. So grades are fantastic. They also do a reasonable amount of chunk damage, especially if you're using like the highest ones. Like if you're using a thorium grenade, it's like 500 extra damage. It's more important in most cases just have the stun. So you can just get iron grenades if you need, but those are great. Things like sappers can be good, especially on priest, because priest is great at managing the health deficit, right? So when you use a sapper on something like a rogue, typically it's also good for rogue to use sapper because rogue's win con in most fights is just beating them before they beat you, so like rushing them down. So taking the damage to your HP doesn't matter as much, but it can in certain cases, right? There is that little, chance that sort of backfires on you, and that damage that you did to yourself catches up to you later. Whereas it's very unlikely on priest because you're not really going to be losing the fight from the damage your sapper did. In most cases, you're going to be losing the fight when you're completely out of mana, if that makes sense. Yeah, sure, technically you maybe could have, if you didn't have to cast a heal to heal that little bit of damage, you'd go out of mana a little bit later, but, it probably doesn't matter at that point, right? So it's all about, like, the win condition. Priest is really good with engineering. The cap, the incapacitates, amazing. So all these things are things that I would recommend. Like, if you really want to be somebody who's a problem in World PvP and difficult to kill, you really want to have engineering, and you really want to have all the gnomish gadgets and all the goblin gadgets. The thing that breaks the Skull of Impending Doom, another really important thing versus mages, right? And you're not even going to see, if you watch me stream when I farm in the open world, especially some of the farming I do, like some of it if I'm like working or something like that, I'm not fully there during the farm. So you won't even see me use all these items. Like I don't even know if the VODs are still there, but if you go back and you watch like when I was farming in Ashara and stuff like that, or in other places, or in Ungaro, like I wouldn't have Skull of Impending Doom on me at all times. I probably should have, but I just didn't, because the problem is how I was doing the farming. It was sort of like half AFK. So if somebody would attack me at certain times, like I couldn't really respond to them and fight back anyway. There'd only be certain times where I'd be really at the keyboard, like 100% playing, like I could kind of fight back. But if you want to be that person that is a problem to take out and you can like always fight back, then you need all these extra items, all these engineering items. So that's one thing, and we'll kind of get back into the class talk. So we kind of derailed for a little bit, but that's going to happen in this video because it's pretty off the cuff. So like I said, Warrior depends on how geared they are. The main thing with Warrior 2 is like it's a fight about can they rush you down or are you going to out-sustain them? So that's why their damage is such a big deal. Not only that, but they get more rage, the thing they use to do more damage, based on how much damage they deal to you. So if they don't have a good weapon, it's really problematic for them. One moment. Okay, we're back. One of the big issues with Warrior is getting through your shield. So if they can't get through your shield reliably in a reasonable amount of time, it's very easy for you to win the fight because they're not generating rage while they're attacking your shield. But if they just have a super good weapon and they get a one crit that just wipes out your shield super fast, then again, it's really easy for them to kind of just zug you down. And like I said, you're pretty much never taking them out if they use all their cooldowns, like Wreck and stuff. But Wreck is a very long cooldown, so you don't have to worry about that too much. And a lot of people actually tend not to pop these things in 1v1 world fights. You'd be surprised. I play Rogue mostly for PvP, and the amount of times I've seen a Warrior even use Retaliation or something is very low. So for your average player, those things might not even be on their bar. Or they might be on their bar, but they're only thinking of using them in PvE. So that's a major advantage to you. What class should we talk about next? Let's talk about Mage next. So Mage is another class, in my opinion, that you really just should not beat almost ever. Because realistically, they should never be able to die to you, that's for sure. Because they should always be able to basically reset on you. Now, the one exception to this is there's the Skull of Impending Doom, and there's a particular berry. You'd have to look it up. I don't recall the name off the top of my head, but it's for a quest, and basically what you do is like you don't ever complete the quest, and you go out and you farm the berries or something, and then you use one right before you're about to get polyed, and then it does like a small amount of damage. It's actually way better than Skull because the thing with it does like no damage, where Skull can actually do a reasonable amount of damage to you, and you do heal, but the problem is Mage is so bursty, so you can have issues with Skull sometimes. But you can also cancel Skull, right? But the problem is like once you cancel Skull, now you have no way of protecting against another polymorph that goes out, so you have to be kind of careful with how you time it, right? But a lot of people aren't going to have Skull or the berries, and if you don't have Skulls or the berries, then it's very difficult to really kill a mage. But what you're going to want to do for mage is basically just outlast them and make it very annoying. And if the mage isn't super geared, especially, and you're pretty geared, you can do that against most bad mages because they don't really understand how to set up a good kill window on you. And something to note about mages is that you want to dispel when you get frozen because they can shatter off you, especially if they're cold. If they're a fire mage, it's actually really difficult sometimes to fight against them because depending on how geared they are, even if they're not geared sometimes, they still do a ton of damage. And realistically, what'll happen is they will just, poly you. They'll hit you with their kind of combo. And if they do enough damage to you in the combo, sometimes it can just outright kill you. This is another reason, though, why you always want to have 4 up if you're in the world. There's no reason not to have 4 and Spirit up because they're 60-minute buffs. So you should always have those up at all times, basically. The one that you're probably going to get caught with your pants down with is the Power Heals phone. The Improved Inner Fire, or just Inner Fire in general, that's something that, you might not have on you all the time because it only has like a 10-minute duration. But it is very easy to put on. Like, it doesn't cost very much. So you can actually apply that kind of mid-fight. Still, you want to use it before you actually make contact if possible, because it does eat up a global, right, which you could just be spending on something else. And against something like Warrior, kind of going back to Warrior for a moment, you do want to refresh this, right? And even against an Arms Warrior that uses a 2-hand, it kind of goes by surprisingly fast. Against a Rogue, it actually it disappears so quickly because they're dual wielding and they have special attacks. So you really want to make sure that you're reapplying it because it's a huge amount of damage reduction against these classes. The thing is, for how Inner Fire works, is it gives you a pretty good amount of armor because as a cloth wearer, you basically have no armor to start with at all. And, well, I'm not no armor, but a very small amount of armor. So any armor you get is basically huge value. Just huge value. And you're basically increasing the damage reduction probably from 5 to 8% in some cases to by 20%. So you're probably in the 20s or maybe even close to approaching 30%. So it's absolutely insane. This is also why Shadow can be so good, right? Because Shadow has this armor from Inner Fire still, right? You're able to have this on when you're Shadow. And you can even recast it when you're Shadow because it's a discipline spell. And then on top of that, you have flat damage reduction, physical damage reduction. And that's actually better than getting more armor from the Shadow thing, because if you were to get more armor, since you already have a decent amount of armor once your Inner Fire is up, what that means is that you would get less mitigation per point of additional armor that you got. Let's say Inner Fire brings you to 22 something. I forget the exact values. But let's say it brings you to 2,700. I think I remember 2,700 being a value of armor that I had. So if you have 2,700 armor, and let's say Shadow Form gave you, I don't know, 600 extra armor or something, that would probably be less in terms of the actual math for in terms of damage being dealt to you than the 10% reduction. So the Shadow Form and the Inner Fire work really well together, which is kind of something that sucks when you don't have Shadow Form, right? But still, you can make do. And like I said, sorry, like I said, mages are, we're jumping all over the place. We went back to warriors, sorry, but going back to mages. So yeah, mages just, they're definitely a problem. I have definitely taken out mages without, the Skull of Impending Doom or the berries. The thing is, you have to catch them in a fear after they've kind of used everything. So that if it's a frost mage, it's going to be very annoying because he has like double block, and then he also has what is it called? Evocate. And Evocate basically restores all his mana. Now, Evocate is the quick way to get your mana and life back, right? Or your mana back. You could also just poly somebody as a mage, especially if they don't have skull or anything, and you just blink away and sit and eat. So that's a huge problem in itself. So basically what you have to do is you have to kind of catch them lacking. And you always want to keep a dot on them. This is pretty much with everything you're going to fight. Rogues, warriors, hunters. You always want to keep Shadow Word Pain up, right? You want like 100% uptime on this ability. Even when they have a shield on and stuff, it's going to tick through it. Just going to help you do little bits of damage, like while you're kind of doing other things. And you basically want to have that up. And you want to just kind of wait out their mana pool. And they have to use Evocation, right? And then once they start to get low from, maybe you casting Mind Blast, your mana burns, your wand attacks, whatever you're able to get off on them, you should be mana burning casters whenever you can. But once they start to get low, they'll probably block, and then they have another block waiting. So it's just a game of like you have to sit back and burn all their resources, and then if they used everything, if they use the 2 blocks and Evocate, there's definitely a window where you can take them out if they disrespect you. Like if they're around like 60% health and low mana, you want to kind of wait until that point, and then you hit a fear, then you put your dot on them, and then you like Mind Blast them, and then just mana burn them and try and take them out there. Maybe finish them with their wand or whatever, But again, like the problem is, even at that point where they're out of everything, Mage has to get out of jail free because they can just poly you again as long as you're not on DR. And the DR is not really that long. And the polymorph lasts forever. So once the DR resets, the poly is really dangerous because they can either run away, they can full reset on you. And, everybody likes to talk about the heartbeat. And the reality is these spells don't heartbeat all that much. So you can get a lucky heartbeat here and there, but you can't count on it. And Mage is really annoying to take out as a priest. But yeah, you basically just use Mana Burn. And the thing is, I'm going to be talking about this more generally when we get into how to fight kind of just more generally. But you basically want to keep yourself at as high as health as possible in all these encounters. And this includes kind of pre-shielding yourself, using Renew. You don't really want to have those two active right at the same time. Ideally, you kind of want to wait. Like if you put a shield on yourself and you see the Frostbolt coming in, once it hits and takes out the shield, then you put the Renew on, if that makes sense. Because you don't want to waste Renew ticks because you really need to be mana efficient here. But the thing is, you can't get too low because whenever you get too low, you're very vulnerable. Right, it's very easy for a mage to get on-demand burst at the end, and a good mage is not going to use all their burst on you at the start unless they're super sure they'll kill you in that initial burst. What they'll do is they'll just cast spells at you, try to get you low, then try to get a counterspell on you when you go to heal, and then blow you up. So, having your Fordon helps just as much HP as possible. Having spells that sustain you over time, like Renew, helps. Having shields, which are instant cast, helps a lot. And that's basically the only way you can even try and fight a mage as Disc. It's going to be very rough. Going over to Warlock, this is another fight that, Priest just really shouldn't win, in my opinion. Warlock has the Mana Burn, they have the pets, they have the Fear. The Fear is a big problem because even if you're undead, like I usually am, it's a target fear. And, you use it once, and then they just fear you again. Maybe you have your trinkets, right, which I believe dispels fear on priests. But then you have to use your trinket, And they're like, of course, now you're able to fight them a little bit, right? Because the next fear they cast on you is going to be pretty DR'd. But the problem is, once that DR resets, you are basically screwed because you're out of all your abilities, and the DR is going to reset, way faster than your trinket or anything is going to reset. So Warlock is a very tough matchup. It's got the mana drain as well, right? They can silence you with a pet. They can sleep you with a succubus. They can curse of exhaustion you and just like kite you with dots, basically, right? And you can't cleanse it because you're a priest. You can't cleanse curse. So a Warlock really has no business losing to this type of priest, and you basically, just have to kind of get lucky here. The one thing is that they don't have as many defensive options as a mage, but the thing is, the defensive option that they do have is really good if they're a sack Warlock. So if they sack their Voidwalker, it's going to be a huge problem for you to defeat them because you don't really have the damage to get through their shield. Right now, if they don't do this, if they don't sack their pet, which some of them don't, you stand a better chance of killing them. It's basically the same thing where you want to keep your dot up at all times, and you just want to keep renew on yourself, keep shielding yourself, keep trying to mana burn them when you can, and you want to basically take their mana out. The thing is, they can always create more mana with life tap, but if they're life tapping while you're mana burning, they're taking a lot of damage. So again, what you have to do is you just have to basically spam mana burn, keep your dot up, and hope that they don't know what they're doing, and that's basically how you take out a Warlock. Now, Shaman, I don't fight Shaman because I'm Horde. I don't think I've ever fought a Shaman in the open world, so I can't really give you advice there. Paladin, this is just like, don't even fight a Paladin. It's so annoying. I mean, like, theoretically, you just mana burn them, right? But it's so easy for them to kind of like get away. I feel like it kind of depends on what you're fighting, right? But if it's like a holy paladin or like a tank paladin, it's really annoying to take them out. It just is. Like, you can mana burn them all day, but they're just gonna run away. The thing is, you don't really have a way to slow them, right? Is the main problem if you're not Shadow. So, you can mana burn them. They're just going to like walk out of your range. And then, it's like, yeah, you can chase them, but they're just going to keep running. I mean, eventually you can kind of take them out. They're just annoying to take out. They have the shield. They have lay on hands if they want to be really annoying. Priest is definitely probably better at taking out this class than other classes, but I don't tend to bother taking out this class. Rep Paladins can be kind of scary as priests, right? Because in this particular spec, because you don't have a ton of Fizmit. Again, you have Inner Fire. But if they do get on you, you don't really have a good way to get them off outside of your fear. And once that kind of goes away, then they can actually take you out very quickly. So it kind of depends. Like, if they don't get like a wreck bomb on you, if they're not like a reckoning spec, pretty easy maybe to do damage with mana burn and stuff like that. But again, they still have so many tricks up their sleeve, right? They lay on hands and everything like that. To be honest, I don't have much experience fighting paladins because I almost never see paladins in the open world like farming anything. Like, I don't see them farming herbs or anything like that. It's almost always like all the stuff that I encounter in the open world is like mages and like some warriors, and rogues that are in the open world, they're not actually farming anything either. They're just there to grief 90% of the time. But yeah, it's mostly like mages in the open world and warlocks and hunters. I swear, it's like all those. And druids actually as well. Druid, I don't really think you should beat a good druid. Again, it's going to be like that with every class, I feel like, right? Druid has Innervate. They don't really get affected by your mana burn because they can just shift it. Your dots, it's hard for them to really do anything to the druid because the druid can just go and caster form and then cast a rejuvenation on himself and like instantly go back into either cat or bear and just kind of wear you down that way. And druid is just going to wear you down, and it's just an incredibly difficult. They're going to be able to stick on you, right? And there's not going to be a ton you can do about it, really. what you basically want to do with Druid is you want to catch them being lazy, and then you want to hit them with a fear that they have, a difficult time dealing with, like they don't have any answer for it. I forget if Druid can trinket fear. I think that they can. But you basically need to get their trinket if that's the case, and then trinket again. As you can tell, I don't have a ton of experience fighting Druid. I would say Paladin and Druid are the ones that I fight the least, for sure. It's usually Hunters and Mages, usually is what I'm fighting. But yeah, you basically want to catch a Druid at a bad time, like when they don't have a way to get out of your fear, and then just kind of dump everything in there. Preferably you fear them in caster form so you can mana burn them after the Mind Blast. And then, you just try and take them out during that fear. That's going to be your play. And I think that covers like all the base classes. So we're going to talk like kind of general philosophy now that applies, I think, across the board. Basically what you're trying to do as a Holy Disc Priest in the world is you're trying to live for as long as possible while whittling them down. And a lot of classes, like I said, like Mage, like Druid, they have these utility spells, kind of like Druid has the instant heal, Mages have the block and the evocate. They can kind of save them in a bunch of situations. So what you need to be able to do is you need to kind of whittle them down, and then you want to set up a scenario where whatever they have to get out of your fear, they don't have it, and you catch them off guard. Right, so you let them maybe get like low health because they're kind of being a bit lazy. Like maybe the Druid's not shifting out to heal or something because he's pretty confident that he's going to take you out. And then that's where you drop your fear, kind of like at the end of the fight once they've used everything, and then you use everything during that window. Right, so Mind Blast, basically like obviously Shadow Word Pain. You can use what do you call it if the Devouring Plague. You can use Smite if you have to. You basically use anything you can to take out a player that you catch in that fear at the end. You're trying to basically bait them into making a mistake, because if they play it well the entire time, I feel like there's like very little you can do. You're basically playing from the perspective of you're trying to appear almost like as a little noob healer lost in the world, and then you're just kind of fighting them, wearing them down, and then you kind of turn up on them when they least expect it with your fear, because your fear is like your main playmaking move on this class, right? That's the thing that it's kind of like the checkmate button if you catch them at the wrong time, and especially if it doesn't break right away from damage or something, if you don't get like unlucky. So that you really have to play around that window. And the reality is other classes have way more windows to play around and get you, but it's harder for you to do it to them, right? And that is just the reality on this particular version. So, yeah, that's basically what you're trying to do. As the overarching fight strategy, I guess, is you have to survive. And you surviving is critical. That's why you want to be using Renew. You want to be using shields. And just basically whatever it takes to keep yourself alive. Mana pots can be really great, right? Sometimes one major mana really does change the entire outlook of a fight, especially if the opponent's not expecting it. Like I said, it's good to have the other potions in case you need them, but mana potions are fantastic. If you can't afford major manas for the open world, the combat potions you get from being like rank 6 work decently well as well. So you want to pop them like early on if you can as well, because then it just gives you more time to pop the next one, obviously. So stuff like that is really strong. Let's talk a little bit about the specs to kind of end this out, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make versions of the specs that are compatible with you raiding, right? Because that's the whole point of this, is that because if you had any choice of spec, you'd probably be running around in the world in Shadow, right? So we're going to assume that the reason why you found yourself in the situation why you're fighting people as Holier Disc is because, you can't have a Shadow spec or something, right? So let's look at a spec that involves power infusion, right? So Unbreakable Will, 3/3 Power Word Shield, 2/2 Fortitude, 3/3 Meditation, Inner Focus. Inner Focus is interesting. You can do a lot with it. Sometimes I like to use this with Devouring Plague, because it takes such a large amount of mana. The one thing you have to be careful of with this and Devouring Plague is using it against mages. So, and obviously other priests. You don't want Devouring Plague another priest because you use like 900 mana to cast it, and they just, or I guess technically 0 if you use this, but you use your cooldown, and then they just dispel it with 1 cleanse. So that's a terrible trade. So don't use it if there's another priest around. The thing with the mages, you have to be careful because if you use it too early in the fight, like when their blocks are up, a lot of times what mages will do is they'll wait to block until you plague them because they know that you don't have much damage as a disc priest, right? So they want to put it on you to use your damaging abilities first so they can block and get like full value from the block, right? Because it removes Devouring Plague and Shadow Word Pain. So typically when I fight a mage, I'm opening with Shadow Word Pain. I'm trying to mana burn as much as possible and avoid using something like Devouring Plague until like later in the fight when their cooldowns are down, right? I want that to be almost like the finishing thing. Like I put a Shadow Word Pain and a Devouring Plague on them, and when they're already kind of low, and that puts a lot of pressure on them, right? So yeah, that's how I like to use Devouring Plague in that particular matchup, and you have to be careful using it early versus mages. So put 1 point in Martyrdom here. So improved mana burn, I think, is great. And there's a lot of options you have. I don't like the idea of going for Force of Will. It seems good, right? Like it's offensive. Like, hey, we need some offense, but there's just too many great utility things we have here. So obviously we need the mana burn. Another point in Martyrdom is great, right? Just a fantastic choice. Inner Fire is always good. I feel like putting small amounts of points in Inner Fire, not always the biggest deal though. The Wand Special Edition can be good, especially if you have a hard-hitting wand, because your wand doing 25% more damage can be really important in some fights, like especially when your kind of mana is out there. Like in a lot of the caster fights, you are going to be, using, you're going to be using mana burn, right? So you don't use your wand too much in these unless you're completely However, in fights against melee, once you use your Mind Blast, I don't really like the idea of trying to like spam smite unless you have a build that's like heavily into spell power and you have something like Power Infusion up. Like, for example, if you watch Holy Priest's kind of fighting guides on YouTube, there's this druid, I forget his name, Germanicus, I think, and he makes tons of videos where he fights like really well geared players that know their class as well. And if you watch his videos, you'll see one where he fights a priest, and the way the priest plays the fight in there, it looks way different than how I'm telling you to play it. That's because he really knows what he's doing, and his gear, he's like a Nax priest optimized to do damage. Like he's basically like a smite priest, right? So this build can be powerful in the open world if you're like fully decked out and you're kind of leaned into the reason why I exist is to basically slay people as, Disc Holy. But I'm making this guide from a perspective of like you are just trying to defend yourself as a raider, right? Like you're not going out there getting bis optimal gear for the intention of bringing it into the world and then hunting people, like that guy, like the guy he fought in his video, right? So yeah, it's just a different. It's gonna like you might see things where this holy disc thing looks really strong, and like I said, it can be really strong when you have really good gear in like the late game, right? Because in the late game you have so much like regen, you have so much healing that you can get on yourself for a very minimal cost, right? Your renew actually does an insane amount of healing to you for super minimal cost in late game. Your defense is pretty good against melee because you have Inner Fire and you have the highest versions of armors available. Your shield is going to be the strongest it's going to be possibly because you have healing power. Even though it's only like a tenth of your healing power, it's still going to be like the strongest it's ever going to be, right? When you're in like Nax gear. So there's a lot that you can accomplish like super late game. That's not really what this guide is about, right? So this is like an underrated thing for sure. If to use against melees, right? When you because like if you're just a normal player and you're not popping like the ZG trinket with power infusion or whatever. I don't even know if you can actually use those together. But like if you're not chaining those back to back or whatever while you're casting your smites probably aren't going to do a ton. So if you have a really strong wand, you're kind of better off saving the mana and just like wanding people, like wanding the melee players. And the only spells that I'm like hard casting usually is like Mind Blast, and then again, like I said, in the caster matchups, I'll cast Mana Burn, right? Because we're trying to be as efficient as possible because we don't have the damage in this scenario to just zug people down like somebody who's like actually trying to play Smite Priest out in the wild. So yeah, I mean, you can put another point into here. I think this is like the most effective point. You can start putting points into wand specialization. You're going to get power infusion regardless, right? Then over here, you're going to get improved renew. You really want 2/2 and healing focus. You're going to get divine fury, and then you're going to have inspiration. Now, here's where you can start to make like little tweaks. It's nice to have 1 point in Holy Nova, just for things like catching rogues out of stealth or a druid out of stealth. Most of the time it's going to be like a rogue. Like if a rogue just vanishes on you with the intent of trying to leave, you can just break him out really quick and then put a dot on him. So 1 point in Holy Nova is nice. Spell warding seems really good. The problem is it's only 2% per point, so it's kind of like to really see a noticeable difference, you kind of need all 5 points, and it's just difficult to commit to that in an actual rating spec, right? Because again, like look, we only have 2 points left here, right? And where are you gonna put those? You could put them in there, but then now you're not even at 6 out of 6, right? Oops, what did we do here? Oh no, we went down one. Okay. You could take points out of Improve Renew and put them in here if you want. Like if I was fighting mostly casters, I might do that. This is something you can keep in mind as well, because a lot of times if you're farming a specific area, you're going to run into the same people over and over. So for example, like in the area I was fighting, it was like hunters and mages. So it would maybe make more sense for me to take spell warding than it would be if I was in Fellwood and I was constantly running into warriors that were trying to farm whipper tubes, right? And then this doesn't really do anything for me. So it depends where you're farming as well. This isn't like, again, a terrible talent. It's a lot of investment, and it's not game changing to a huge degree. And I would say if you're very undergeared in general, this is just not a great talent to begin with, because realistically, what's going to make the difference in surviving Mage Burst is high health and something like this talent, right? Just having this, if you have like very bad gear, probably not going to be enough to save you. Where it could make the difference is like if your health pool is already high and they're already going to be it's already going to be annoying for them to take you out. This is going to add an extra layer of protection, right? That's going to maybe prevent them from just RNG giving you in this particular case. But again, not highly recommended. So you could put points in here, but again, it's only 10% damage, and it's kind of it's hard to get these spells off sometimes. Like a Holy Fire takes forever to cast, right? You could put points in this if you want, but I don't really think it's the best. Let's go with a more traditional like Holy spec, right? Or Holy / Dis spec. Now there is a Tri spec. I feel like most people are not going to be Tri spec though, but what Tri spec involves is like you basically get meditation, you get divine fury. Let's see if I can just make one like really quick here. Also, even something like this, if you know you're gonna if you knew you were fighting like hunters, right? Basically only hunters, it wouldn't make sense to take Unbreakable Will, right? But it kind of does make sense to take it if you're fighting a bunch of things, right? But you could, in specific cases where you know you're not going to be fighting a certain thing, you could take those points out, put them right into wand specialization. So again, be flexible, right? But yeah, going back to what I was saying, let's try and make this tri-spec really quick. Hold on. So we'll put points in here. We'll just put a couple in here. There we go. So we got that. We'll reset this tree. We're going to go like the essentials here. Okay. And then I think in tri-spec you'd probably get blackout because you're not going to really use this in rage. It's very unlikely that you were going to get the last hit. Maybe if you're a dungeon spec, you would use this, but you're probably not using it. You'd probably put 2 in here. You would put maybe like, how many points can you put in here? I don't think you wouldn't really need all these for PvP, I think, but to be honest, it'll let you gear very flexibly, and then you usually come down to silence, I believe, is the point of the spec. It would be probably useful to have Mind Flay, to be honest, and then the range is very good, and then you need like 2 more points. You're not going to be using Fade. You're probably just going to take Shadow Weaving here and then Silence. Then you can like fill out Shadow Weaving, or you can come and get this, or you can get more in this thing over here. I don't think you can reach Improved Mana Burn, can you? Oh, you can. So yeah, you might want to actually get Mana Burn here. So you could do something like this. You could get Vampiric Embrace. So this like tri-spec thing is definitely the best for kind of like world PvP. You can see you can be like really flexible with it. Having like a silence really helps. There's some certain cases where having Mind Flay would really help, right? There's certain cases where having Vampiric Embrace would help. There's definitely cases where having reduced cooldown on your Psychic Stream would help. Shadow Word Pain lasting 6 more seconds is amazing for a bunch of different reasons. It's great for just the efficiency of the spell, but it's also great for being able to like reapply it in some cases before it ticks out, right? So if you have a rogue that is trying to escape and be able to re-stealth, there could be certain situations where the additional 6 seconds here are what allows you to reapply Shadow Word Pain where you wouldn't otherwise. Something like this. The Shadow Weaving is great, stacks up the damage on them. I believe you can stack this up too by spamming rank 1 Shadow Word Pain. Not entirely sure about that, but I believe you can do that, and that's obviously very strong. So there's a lot you can flex into here the more you go into the Shadow Tree, but the problem is you're kind of losing a lot from the Healing Tree. Right now, are you losing like a ton? Not necessarily, but here's the reason why a lot of people probably don't go this build, right? If you go this build and you come down to Silence, you can't get Power Infusion, right? Because you're also going to want to get Divine Fury for sure. There's no way, even if you don't go all the way to the Silence thing, you're going to want to get Divine Fury, which is 10 points in here, okay? And then you're going to need to max out Discipline, or not max it out, but just get to a point. I'm just putting random points in here so we can get to, yeah. So you only have 10 points left at this point in order to put points in over here. And Blackout is nice. This is nice to have, but you're probably not going into Shadow just for this, right? At that point, you're probably better off just finishing out what you have in the tree here. So again, if you go this tri-spec thing, you're giving up PI, which a lot of people don't like, right? A lot of people are going to want you to have PI. Let's say you raid in a guild and you don't have to have PI, right? The other spec you're probably going to go for PvE if you don't need to be PIing people is this holy spec, which we'll just make this really quick. Okay, and then we have... Okay. See, this is a spec where if you're going this spec and you're not going all the way down to Power Infusion, you have like more room. You see how I put 2 points in Holy Specialization? You could put those in Spell Warding, and now you have even more points you could put in Spell Warding because you don't really need Holy Reach most of the time. So technically, like if you wanted to like max out Spell Warding, right, you could do something like 2 in Spell Warding, 3 in this, 2 more in Spell Warding, and then you max out this, and then you either pick dumping the last 5 in Spiritual Healing or dumping the last 5 in Mental Strength, right? So yeah, you can kind of do either of those. But the main thing that you're going deeper into Holy for is the spiritual guidance talent. This, especially in the late game, is huge. It's like, just think about it, it's 25% of your spirit. It's not uncommon for you to have like 500 spirit, right? So it's basically 125 healing, right? That, and spell damage, which actually does help, in things like open world fighting and stuff like that. Like, it'll make your Shadow Word Pain stronger. So this is a great talent to have in PvE if you're not having to go into Power Infusion. And if you go into Tri-Spec here, you're unable to get that as well, as long as get all the other core talents. So yeah, it's just like unlikely that you're going to be a Tri-Spec player or that you're going to really invest much into Shadow. Something that I've seen people do is they've invested like 5 points into Blackout. See how you have like 5 points left over in some of these specs? Investing the 5 points into Blackout, it doesn't like sink you, because losing 10% of the base healing value here, or 10% of your mana, is not necessarily the end of the world. I will say that if you're using a flask and everything, this basically comes down to like 1k, I think, because you're going to have about probably 10k without this. So you'll probably have like 11k with it. Like, you can get your mana up really high if you focus on it. So if I had to pick one of these, it depends. Like, if I was struggling to actually do fights, I would probably do Mental Strength. And if I was somebody who was like going to be fighting in the open world more, I'd obviously pick Mental Strength here over the Spiritual Healing. In the most recent era release, I actually did go Spiritual Healing a lot, because mana was just not an issue for me, because my guild was like dominating the content for the most part, so I just wanted as much raw healing as possible. But this could be something that you look into, right? So it's kind of your choice there. And like I said, you could always put the points into Blackout. The thing with Blackout is that it's only on the initial application. A lot of people think that Blackout is super OP because every tick of Shadow Word Pain allows Blackout to proc. That is not the case. Now, what you could do is you could spam Shadow Word Pain, but it's not really worth, in most cases, like spamming a rank 1 Shadow Pain just to get a Blackout proc, because you're kind of using a lot of globals to do that. And you're not using all that many Shadow spells, to keep in mind, right? You're basically Mind Blasting, and then you're using Shadow Word Pain are the ones that are most likely going to proc this. So, do you want to take this if you're an open world person? I mean, it can be nice to get a 3-second stun on somebody, right? It's obviously really good. The problem is when the stun comes can sometimes be a big deal, right? And sometimes it's more valuable to get a stun than other times. Sometimes it doesn't do as much. So it's kind of one of those things where play around with it. If you like it, take it. I've personally never taken it on any of these specs. And I just pretty much, I'm always out there in the world as like full Holy. And most of the time I'm running this spec. So it'd be something like, I'd be running like something like this if I was really trying to maximize like PvP in the open world. And yeah, I think this is pretty reasonable. I might take like 1 point out of this or 1 point out of Renew and put it into Holy Nova, just for more flexibility in PvE and PvP. But other than that, this is a pretty solid build. And the final thing I want to talk about is racials. So I think there's like 3 main racials. You can kind of count human maybe as a 4th. Like, human perception is obviously, just great for finding rogues, specifically if you're dealing with rogues that are kind of giving you a hard time. But other than that, it's not really great. The main problem with rogue in perception is that, unlike in something like Arena in TBC, where the whole point of an arena is you load in and you're fighting an opponent, right? The problem in world PvP is you don't know when the rogue is there to use perception, right? Because you have to already know he's there. You can't have it active all the time, right? It's a cooldown. So if he's just ganked you or something and you're kind of making a prediction of when he's going to re-gank, you could use it, and that's helpful. It's helpful in certain battleground situations, but in the open world, in terms of like, if somebody is just kind of ganking you and then like taking you out and leaving and then coming back at some random time, it's not really going to have a lot of value in terms of, somebody basically, in terms of you being able to like turn the fight on a rogue or something, right? And the thing is, like, in terms of during the battle, the problem is that you're probably just going to get stun locked from the moment the fight starts. Like, you're not really in this position where it's like, oh, I am looking for the rogue once the fight started after he, like, vanished and he doesn't have any hot dots on him or anything like that. Most times he's either going to have a dot on him or you're going to be, like, stunned or blinded when he goes into stealth, you know, and then he's going to open on you before you come out. So there's not a lot of opportunities to really use this in the way you would think, right? And then another honorable mention is Night Elf. So Night Elf is like a troll pick, in my opinion, that's kind of good for, like, if you want to take people's buffs or something like that. Or, I mean, it is good in being able to kind of get the jump on people, because that's one of Priest's biggest weaknesses in general, is, like, if you start out at a distance from Priest, it's very difficult from the Priest to, like, kind of land a kill on the target, right? Because the problem is they don't have any way to really, like, slow them or crowd control them without being up close to fear. So if you start in close range and you kind of dump everything on them, come out of stealth, you know, with a big nuke, and then just drop a fear on them, and then, you know, reapply the dots and zug them down like that, then obviously that can be somewhat strong, right? Use your shards. I don't know if the shards are good at all because I don't play Night Elf Priest, but I imagine you would just use them for extra damage, right? So Night Elf is a little bit of a troll pick, but obviously can be good in, like, those niche scenarios. It's also good in PvP generally if you're kind of, like, you know, if you're trying to defend something, like in Warsong, and you're not trying to show that you're there. So there's uses for it, but it's not, like, I would say, the first thing you're going to think of when you're picking a race for World PvP. And what about the other two races? So it's Troll and, well, actually, there's Dwarf too. So Dwarf is kind of like the Giga race for this, in my opinion, because not only is Fear Ward just insane and better than Will the Forsaken, but also the slept on thing with Dwarf is just the fact that it has Desperate Prayer, which is insane because it's like no mana heal. The heal is an absolutely insane amount. And yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game, right, is living. And the cooldown is relatively short. It's probably going to be up like every other fight you encounter in the world. So that's just incredibly strong and something that you know, you're definitely going to make use of if you're playing Dwarf, right? So Dwarf, I'd probably say, is like the strongest. Undead I kind of like next because Will the Forsaken strong, but also Devouring Plague is useful in a lot of matchups in a 1v1 scenario, especially. The healing it does is definitely underrated. And like I said, the only other class that I don't really like using it against is kind of like Mage. You have to be really careful when you use it. But for most of the other classes, it's just, you know, free pressure on them, right? So Devouring Plague is really strong. The Troll is actually quite strong. The like the little lightning shield around you. I knew the name. Before I made the video, I knew the name, and now I forget the name. But it's basically like this little it's like a damage reflect shield, sort of. And this can be fairly strong as well, especially against something like Rogue, right? So, you know, that's a good option if you're planning on fighting melee. Personally, I think that Undead is, in the most amount of scenarios, the ones that I encounter, Undead helps me the most, right? So that's why I play Undead. But maybe you're just fighting tons of rogues or tons of melee or something. I think it's Shadow Guard is what it is for the Troll. And, you know, maybe you just find Shadow Guard to be more useful than Will the Forsaken and Devouring Plague. And if that's the case, you know, can't really argue with you from your, like, personal perspective of what you're coming up against out in the world, right? But with what I run up against most of the time, like, I'm fighting hunters a lot, and I find that the extra, you know, just like the extra damage from, and the healing from Devouring Plague can be really, really helpful. So that's why I tend to go with that. But yeah, that is basically the rundown. That was a super long video. This might be one of my worst videos, but like I said, just kind of like an off-the-cuff fun thing. We'll kind of get back to making, you know, more Classic Plus content and stuff like that, where there's maybe a bit more thought put into things. But this is just my it's basically like my tips from my experience in the world. And my excuse for this one is kind of just that, like, I don't have a better way to make this video, because a lot of the encounters that I encounter in the world, you know, they are like imperfect and spontaneous. That is like the nature of it. And these are just kind of like my survival tips, which is basically what the guy asked for, right? I don't duel a lot of classes on Priest, so I don't know like the intimate matchup of Holy Priest for every 1v1 scenario. Like, I haven't done 100 duels with a warrior and figured out like the optimal way to do the fight, or the optimal way to do the fight on warlock. So I'm kind of just giving you general principles that you kind of want to employ as a priest that help, you know, they kind of they basically take what you're good at, which is staying alive and whittling down the enemy, and that's what my principles are kind of telling you to focus on and go into, if that makes sense. So yeah, let me know if you guys like this. It's a little bit different. We don't normally talk about PvP on this channel, and it's kind of a scuffy video, but I think there's some good advice in here, and I hope that this this helped Devin if he watches this video. So shout out to Devin. Thank you for the question, and I'll be back to hopefully more scheduled content. Hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully the blizzard's not really that bad, but we'll see. So I will talk to you guys later, and see ya.